Italian railway passengers were able in June to take the world's first intercity tilting train, known as the Pendolino, which entered service on the Rome-Milan line, hitting speeds up to 250 km an hour, 160 miles an hour, cutting the journey time to under 4 hours. The Pendolino ETR 450, to give it its full name, was based on technology originally developed in the 1970s by British Rail for their advanced passenger train, which turned out to be a highly publicised flop. In London, Wembley Stadium hosted an all-star concert celebrating Nelson Mandela's 70th birthday. There was an impressive lineup including sets by Simple Minds, Whitney Houston, Tracy Chapman, The Eurythmics, UB40 and Dire Straits, stand-up comedy by Harry Enfield, Billy Connolly, Lenny Henry and Michael Palin, and music by South African artists such as Hugh Masekela, Jonas Gwangwa and Ama Mpondo. The event was the brainchild of Jerry Dammers, founder member of British ska group The Specials, whose 1984 hit single Free Nelson Mandela was played at the event, of course. And in the week between races, the group stages of the European Football Championships wrapped up with Italy and West Germany progressing with ease from their group, and England performing unexpectedly poorly to lose all of their games. And West German police had to arrest over 100 English supporters in outbreaks of violence around the matches, further cementing England's reputation for football-related hooliganism. The tournament's semi-finals would pit old rivals West Germany and the Netherlands against each other in Hamburg, with the USSR taking on Italy in Stuttgart. Meanwhile, the F1 teams rolled up to Detroit without much enthusiasm. Now in its 7th year, the track had never really been popular with teams and drivers. The track tended to break up over the weekend, a problem the organisers had never really managed to solve, and the temporary pits were difficult to work in and had scant shelter from the elements. FISA agreed and had demanded at least that the city of Detroit build some permanent facilities if they wanted to keep the race. The city, however, felt the expense and disruption would not be worth it for one race weekend a year, but instead proposed building a new circuit on the island of Belle Isle in the Detroit River, which could be used all year round. At any rate, it had been announced that this would be the last race at the unloved street circuit. With the teams on the road for the last 3 weeks, once more little had changed on the cars, but Minardi had apparently lost patience with Adrian Campos's performances, 4 DNQs in 5 races, and in came Team Old Boy Pierluigi Martini, who'd spearheaded their entry into F1 back in 1985. Martini had looked somewhat out of his depth in F1 in 1985, even given the limitations of the new car, and in the following year he took a step back into Formula 3000, driving a route for Pavesi Racing alongside Luis Perez Sala. He won 3 races that year to push Ivan Capelli close for the title, and continued with Pavesi into 1987, now paired with Pasta heir Paolo Barilla. Results were a lot harder to come by that year though, and Martini could only manage 1 5th place and second at Pergusa to come 12th overall. Fellow F3000 driver Lamberto Leone had started his own team that year, First Racing, and in 1988 Martini joined up, now paired with Marco Apicella. By the time of Detroit, Martini's results had been promising rather than great, 8th at Jerez, 11th at Vallelunga, 3rd at Pau, and 10th at Silverstone. But Martini will continue racing with First when the F1 schedule allows, as he reunites with Perez Sala at the top level. As usual, practice and qualifying saw a series of shunts and bumps as the drivers found the limits of the circuit, their machinery and themselves. Tarquini was the victim of pre-qualifying for the first time this year, and then qualifying proper got underway. Everyone seemed to be having problems except, as usual, Ayrton Senna, who finished Friday 1.5 seconds ahead of everyone else. Saturday's qualifying session was incredibly hot and the track was already breaking up severely, so anyone who didn't go out early was never going to improve their times. Stefano Modena hit a wall and ricked his neck, but was past fit to race, albeit wearing a neck brace, but his unfortunate compatriot Ivan Capelli broke a bone in his toe and would miss out despite his Friday time having been good enough for 21st. Senna's Friday time was the only sub 1 minute 41 lap of either session, which gave him his 6th pole from 6, equalling the record for consecutive pole positions with Sterling Moss and Niki Lauda. Alongside him would be not Alain Prost, but Gerhard Berger, with Alboreto 3rd and Prost back in 4th after going out too late once the track had deteriorated. Boutsen and Mansell were top of the atmospheric pile on row 4, with Nannini 7th and Piquet, winner here in 1984, back in 8th. Warwick overcame his soreness from Canada to put his arrows 9th, and Patresi's second Williams made up the top 10, with Streff and De Cesaris continuing their respective great qualifying form on the row behind. The only American in the race, Cheever, was 15th alongside Pierluigi Martini, justifying the team's decision by going a second faster than his teammate. Ivan Capelli withdrew early enough that Nicolarini was bumped up to the grid in his Ozella with Nakajima, Schneider and Ginzani, all in turbo cars, the three non-qualifiers. There were two support races scheduled for Sunday morning, IndyCar Feeder Series Super V and the Trans Am Series, and given the state of the track, the F1 organisers pushed to have them cancelled, but the TV rights had to be honoured and they went ahead, destroying most of the cement patches laid overnight. By Sunday afternoon, as the F1 teams took over, the sun was hammering down again, and most of the pundits thought pole sitter Ayrton Senna would complete his hat-trick of Detroit wins after 1986 and 87 in the Lotus. But many were predicting, and the Ford executives present were hoping, that the normally aspirated cars would be nimbler and quicker around the corners. And of course, the track conditions would potentially throw in a wildcard, as Gerhard Berger told CBS.
Today the track is going to break up badly. It did yesterday afternoon. What's that going to do to this race?
It will be very, very difficult. If you make a mistake and you run off line, you will have an accident. And a lot of people will have an accident. I hope I am not.
Meanwhile, Nigel Mansell's Williams broke a joint in its drivetrain on the way round to the grid, and he had to get a lift back with Cheever and hop in the spare, making it out just before the pit closed with minutes to spare. Despite the Detroit Pistons playing in the NBA Championship against the Lakers on the same day, there was a record crowd out for race day, so everyone lined up for the start under blazing sun, and everyone got away well, as Senna and Berger charged side by side for turn 1, the McLaren winning the drag race, with Alboreto and Prost maintaining their 3rd and 4th places. Not for long though, as Boutsen also snuck ahead of Prost into turn 2. Senna now led Berger and Alboreto, the Austrian hanging on close to the McLaren again, and presumably hoping his engineers had got his fuel gauge screwed on the right way round this time. Jonathan Palmer was in early after bending a wing on Lurari's Eurobrunn, losing lots of time before heading back out. While all that was happening, Prost had got back past Boutsen, and the top 5 were still running close together. Eventually though, Senna began to pull away from Berger, who still had Alboreto and Prost behind him, until Prost nipped past Alboreto after the tunnel and disposed of Berger off camera a few corners later, which turned out to be because Berger was having car trouble already. A puncture this time, which saw Alboreto and Boutsen move past him before he pulled off. Boutsen was soon past Alboreto too, with Nannini shaping up to be next, which will have pleased the Ford execs no end, and Mansell was still stuck firmly to the back of this group too. As the three lapped one of the Eurobruns, Nannini's brakes failed and he tipped Alboreto into a spin. The Ferrari driver kept it running but had to wait until everyone went past before he could throw it in reverse and get moving again. Prost was moving up on Senna, closing the gap with the Benettons now 3rd and 4th, the Williamses 5th and 6th, Warwick 7th, then De Cesaris and Streff, and Piquet 10th. Not a bad showing for the atmospheric cars so far. Nannini pitted to have his suspension looked at, feeling spongy after his coming together with Alboreto, but was sent back out now 6th, while Cheever was left banging his head against his roll hoop as the team fiddled with his electronics before giving up, and he was out after 15 laps. A little later he talked to David Hobbs down in the pit lane.
I've had a terrible weekend right from the first day we started running here. I don't know. I had problems in practice, and in the race I had an engine problem right from the beginning, and that's really slippery out there. My engine wouldn't pick up, so by not picking up I was getting a lot of wheel spin, and I was just bad from day one.
A few laps later, the CBS coverage, which was always keen to cut away from the action on track, was airing a pre-recorded interview with John Judd, when in the background...
I'd say at the moment we're only successful by having engine available. We can't give it to Honda on technical terms.
Why not? Because of money?
Basically money, people, they've got tremendous resources, very dedicated people, they're the smartest in the business at the moment.
How many people have you got working for you in Rugby, England?
40 about.
So you've got about as many people working in the whole factory as Honda have got right here at this race?
That'll be fair comment, I reckon, yeah.
And yet in face of that, you've got the world champion Formula 1 team, Williams, and also the current IndyCar champion, Bobby Rahal, all use Judd engines, right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. I think we'll put a reasonable show up this year, I think, and we hope to improve next year.
Unfortunate timing aside, Mansell had now gone 6 races without a finish, never mind a point, and made it the 7th retirement of the race so far, joining Johansson, Berger, Larini, Cheever, Nannini, whose suspension had indeed been terminally damaged, and Streff. The disappearances of Mansell and Nannini meant that when Senna casually lapped Piquet on lap 20, not quite a third distance, De Cesaris was now up to 5th, with Gugelmin 6th, having passed the reigning champion on his way up the field. The March had an in-car camera mounted and was tucked up close behind the Real, giving the viewers some great footage. They all moved up another place when Patresi's Judd also conked out on lap 25, overheating again, and all the time Senna was leading comfortably, some 8 to 9 seconds ahead of Prost. While Hobbs was interviewing Mansell about his retirement, Piquet was wheeled off after hitting a wall. It was now about half distance with 15 cars still running. It looked like it might be down to 14 when Palmer's throttle got stuck and he stuffed his Tyrrell into a wall, but he kept it running, and with a shove from the marshals he got going again just in time to be lapped by Prost and overtaken by Alboreto, who was still charging up the field after his early spin. Palmer's push start wouldn't disqualify him as he was in a dangerous position and he headed off to start all over again. Another Brit, Warwick, had been having a rough day like his teammate. After pitting for new tyres, he'd come back out only for his own throttle to stick open and land him in the tyre barriers at turn 12. Gugelmin's good day ended with the 4th Judd engine failure of 5 on the grid on his 35th lap, which promoted Pierluigi Martini and Alex Caffey up into the points after both had been quietly running well all afternoon, and Caffey's character would be tested as he had Arnoux right behind him with the opportunity to score his first point since Belgium last May, over a year ago. Prost pitted for new tyres without losing second, and Senna followed suit a little later, likewise without losing the lead. Arnoux had a spin while trying to pass Caffey and quickly dropped out with engine overheating, completing a clean sweep for the Judds. His position behind Caffey was soon taken by Alboreto, who had been going great guns until his rear suspension gave way, so now it was Palmer behind Caffey, and he was on a charge, not only getting past the Dallara, but setting the Atmo fastest lap into the bargain. Modena had a spin and retired, giving viewers a shot of his neck brace, just as Senna was lapping third-placed Boutsen. As the race went into its last 10 laps, Palmer snatched 5th off Martini, unlapped himself from Boutsen, and the Tyrrell team was also listening carefully as Andrea De Cesaris' Real came past with a rough-sounding exhaust. The blue Ferrari had done well before breaking down late on in Canada, and if the same happened here, Palmer could end up 4th. By the penultimate lap, Senna had a 55-second lead and backed right off to cruise home and ensure he didn't run out of fuel. He didn't, and took his 3rd Grand Prix win of the year and his 3rd Detroit win in a row. He was still second to Prost on points, but the way things were going, it looked very much like the best 11 results rule would come into play again, and the number of wins would be crucial. Thierry Boutsen completed an identical podium to Canada to give some consolation to Ford in their home race. The exhaust on De Cesaris' Real held out to take a fine 4th place for the team's first ever points in just their 6th race. Jonathan Palmer took a storming 5th, making you wonder how high up he might have been without the early pit stop and the spin, and Pierluigi Martini held on for 6th, scoring his and Minardi's first ever point. Yannick Dalmas came home 7th, Bailey was running 8th and heading for his first ever finish when a heat exhaustion-induced brain fade put him in a wall, but he was classified 9th anyway, the beneficiary being Alex Caffey, who also ran a good race for the Scuderia Italia team. Senna and Prost had been the only turbocharged cars to finish the race, but anyone predicting the beginning of a resurgence of atmospheric cars hadn't looked at the calendar, coming up with 3 power circuits, Paul Ricard, Silverstone and Hockenheim, where pure horsepower would be king.